there is a moment. For most men, it's a specific, even if they can't always name it exactly. It's a moment when something shifted, something in the way they saw their own life. Not gradually, not over years, in a moment. And after that moment, the same life looked different than it did before. I've been collecting these moments, not formally, just noticing the things that tip a man from living his life to suddenly examining it. Sometimes is a loss. A parent dies, a friend gets a diagnosis. The kind of events that strip the insulation of everything and leaves the real questions exposed. Sometimes it's a birthday, the number 40 or 45 or 50, arriving with a weight no previous birthday carried. Sometimes it's also even quieter. It could be a Sunday afternoon. The house is still, everything is fine. And out of nowhere, without warning, without invitation, a thought arrives. Is this it? Is this it? Not angry, not desperate, just honest. And that question, three words arriving quietly. That is the moment. I think every man who has reached midlife has had at least one version of this moment. And what's interesting is how different the triggers can be. For some men, it's the external jolt, the sudden reminder that time is real and that the buffer they assumed between now and eventually is thinner than they thought. For others, it's internal. It's a slow accumulation of a feeling that finally tips over into clarity. The sense that something important has been deferred for long enough, that the version of life they always meant to get to is not going to arrive on its own. For others, still, and this is the more common than it gets credit for, the moment comes from success, not failure, success, reaching something they worked toward for years, standing inside the achieved version of the goal, and feeling in that silence something they weren't prepared for. Not satisfaction, the absence of satisfaction, and realizing that whatever they were looking for wasn't in the destination after all. But here is the strange part. Most men, when the reevaluation moment arrives, treat it as a problem to solve. They try to identify what went wrong and to fix the mistake. Like it's a mistake. They try to fix the thing. Get back to the feeling of a forward motion as quickly as possible, because the reevaluation is uncomfortable. It doesn't have clean answers. It doesn't reward the kind of decisive action that men are trained to apply to difficult situations. But most men misunderstand this completely, because the reevaluation isn't a problem. It's a perception, I would say it's a perception upgrade. The quality of seeing has changed. What was invisible before, the assumptions underneath the choices, the inherited values running the operating system, the version of success that was handed to you before you could question it. All of that now becomes visible. Not because something went wrong, because actually something went right. A man honest enough, experienced enough, worn down enough by the gap between expectation and reality. That man finally sees clearly. He sees clearly. And what he sees isn't failure. It's just an actual, his actual life. Unfiltered now. Unmanaged. Asking to be taken seriously. Here is something worth sitting with. The reevaluation doesn't start with answers. It starts with a change in the quality of the questions. Before the moment, the real one, the one that sticks, before that moment, the questions a man asks without his life are mostly practical. Think about it. What do I need to do next? What should I be working toward? How do I solve this particular problem? They're operational questions, questions that keep the machine running. But after that moment, something shifts. The questions become existential. Not in a dramatic way, in a personal way. Like, what am I actually doing this for? What am I actually doing this for? Who am I becoming? Not professionally, as a human being. Am I moving towards something I actually want? Or moving away from something I'm afraid of? And this is where things become interesting. Because those questions can't be answered the way operational ones can. They don't respond to effort or energy. They respond to honesty, to the willingness to sit with the discomfort and not having an immediate answer, to the patience of a man who has stopped treating his interior life as a problem to be managed and started treating it as a territory to be explored. And most men never make that shift completely. But the moment of the reevaluation is where the possibility opens. And something changes after 40. Something changes after 50. In what a man is willing to question. When you're younger, the foundations feel necessary. I'm talking about the career, the identity, the structure of the life. These can't be examined too closely because the examination might destabilize them. And you need them stable because you're building on them. But after 40, after 50, when the structure is largely built, when the foundations don't need to be protected quite so carefully, a man finds himself willing to look at things he would have deflected before. The choices that were made from fear rather than from values. The relationships that have been maintained from habit rather than genuine connection. And the version of success that was inherited rather than chosen. And this willingness to look, this new capacity for honest self-examination is not a symptom of midlife crisis. Most men never notice this. But actually, it's a sign of psychological maturity. It's the ability to hold your own life up to the light without needing the examination to confirm everything you've always believed about it. That's not easy. That's not easy at all. It's actually one of the harder things a man can do. And it starts with the moment. Here is a psychological truth that I think matters most. The moment men start reevaluating their lives is not the beginning of a crisis. It's the beginning of authorship. For most of the first half of life, a man is responding to expectations, to circumstances, to the demands of the life as it presents itself. He is, in a very real sense, a character in a story that other forces are mostly writing. The culture, the family, the institutions, a lot of times, the economic necessity. And he plays the character well. He's good at it. It produces real things. But somewhere in midlife, in the moment I'm talking about, in that moment, whenever it arrives, something changes in the relationship between the man and the story. He stops being purely reactive. He starts asking who is writing it and whether he gets a say. Not a wholesale rewrite, not a rejection of everything that came before. I'm talking about just the quiet, fundamental assertion that this is his life, his one life. And if he has anything to say about how it proceeds, if there is any part of the remaining chapters that he gets to shape more deliberately, then the re-evaluation is where that begins. So let me ask you something. Have you had your moment yet? The one where the life you were living became the life you were examining, where the questions stopped being operational and became something more personal. Maybe it was recent. Maybe you're in it right now. Maybe it passed years ago and left something behind that you haven't fully followed up on. And if you had that moment, if you know exactly what I'm describing, I want to ask you something more specific. What did it show you? Not what did you do with it. What did it show you about your life that you couldn't see before? Because the moment of re-evaluation is like a window that opens briefly. And what you see through it, the specific contours of your own life, suddenly visible in a new way. That's information. That's information. That's real, personal, irreplaceable information about what needs more of your attention, what needs to change, and what needs to stop, what has been waiting patiently for years for you to finally take it seriously. Maybe you've been sitting on that information for a while. That's all right. But it's worth going back to. The moment men start re-evaluating their lives is one of the most significant things that can happen to a man. Not because it promises easy answers, not because it produces immediate change, but because it makes a shift in the quality of a man's relationship with his own life. From managing it to actually inhabiting it. From executing the plan to asking whether the plan still fits the man. And from moving forward automatically to choosing consciously, deliberately, the direction of the forward motion. And the man who take that moment seriously, who don't suppress it or outrun it or bury it under more productivity, they tend to live differently in the years that follow. Not dramatically, but with a quality of presence and intentionality that wasn't there before. A sense a sense that the life is being lived rather than just happening. That the remaining chapters are being shaped by the man rather than by the accumulated momentum of the previous years. Now it's different, because now that moment happened. And that's what the moment offers. The question now is what a man does with it. I'll give you my opinion now. I think the moment of reevaluation is actually an act of courage, even when it doesn't feel like one, even when it feels like uncertainty or unraveling or loss of direction, because it requires that something that doesn't quite come easily to most men. It requires that something for you to act on. And that is the willingness to stop moving long enough for you to ask whether the movement is pointed to the right direction. This is what I'm trying to say here. To risk the discomfort of honest self-examination, to hold your own life up and look at it without needing it to be perfect. That's not weakness. That's actually the beginning of everything that matters in the second half of a man's life. And if you are in that moment right now, if something brought you here today, don't rush past it. It's showing you something. Stay with it. Don't rush past it. It's showing you something. Let me know your moment in the comments below, and let me know if you like these videos that I've started creating by hitting the like button, and subscribe if you want to keep working with me. You will find the next video here, and I will see you there.